Although edited for television, tonight's thriller contains scenes of suspense and violence which may be unsuitable for young viewers. Parental discretion is advised.
I know you said you wanted to do something with WildC.A.T.s aliens at some point.
Aliens! 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 They're unstoppable!
Justin, I know you're getting surprised by this. You probably didn't even know we were going to talk about it at all. Do you have any kind of background with the Alien franchise you'd like to share that you haven't? Because you guys have probably already done Alien stuff on your own show, but do you have anything you would summarize real quick?
I don't think so. I mean, I have like very specific memories of watching Aliens for the first time. Like I watched Aliens first and then Alien. But I remember watching it at a friend's house. I was probably maybe like 7 or something, and maybe 6. I might have been 6. But I just remember thinking, this is the greatest movie I've ever seen in my long 6 years of existence. I'd never seen anything like that, and it just blew my mind. And I felt like for the whole rest of the school year, me and my friend who watched, we kind of stayed up late and watched it. I feel like we were constantly talking about aliens and xenomorphs. When they started making toys, the action figure line and stuff, my buddy was all in on that, especially the power loader. When that came out, I remember going to his house to spend the night, and he was like, dude, you're gonna shit when you see this. And he had like the toy of Ripley and the alien, the power loader. I was like, oh man, like I can't believe you got that. And then he wouldn't let me play with it. He's like, no, you'll break it. And he like put it back on the shelf. I was like, why would you do that? Why?
Fucking sadistic son of a bitch. God damn. That's cool. Did you ever get to play the video games?
Yeah, I remember I would rent the Alien 3 NES game pretty often. I liked it, but I didn't get very far in it either. But I don't know, it's just one of those games I'm like, I'm not going to let this game beat me. Like, I'm going to figure it out, and I'm going to save, all these guys from the chestburster killing them or whatever. But I never beat it. Like, that was a frustrating game, if I remember.
They had an arcade game, too, where you actually had the pulse rifle. And, yeah, that was Nirvana for me, because I was such a huge fan of the movie, that to actually be able to hold the thing and shoot the aliens for probably about 50 cents a round, that checked off a box for me in my life, I think. I've already got one recording for this story, but this is a story that a lot of people really like, and I figure that's probably a good one for the 50th episode of the show, to make it a little something of a spectacular. So I'm going to hang back and just sort of do more prompts with you, so it's easier for me to mix everybody together into one recording in the future.
Sure.
So my first question to you is, did you read Image Comics? Were you an Image Comics person when that was when it was hot, when it was a thing?
I came on board for the start of Image, so I sampled pretty much across the board all the titles, and I think of the books that came out, Spawn was the only one that I made to double digits on, and that I think was pretty much because Neil Gaiman and then Dave Sim, there's a bit of a 1-2 punch there. But I think all the Image books I was gone by like issue 12. But WildC.A.T.s looked great. I didn't find anything really compelling in the content. Same with Youngblood. Yeah, probably a speculator at that point by the time, just to keep an eye on things with Image.
I wasn't ever a speculator, but I did have a genuine enthusiasm for the concept of Image, and some of the creators I was very invested in. But as you noted, the books just writing-wise were not there. And like you with Spawn, I hung on because of the writer series. Frank Miller's issue was a really good send-off for me to not want to read Spawn anytime again after that one. And it took me a while before I came back to any of the Image books, but one of the lures was James Robinson and Travis Charest, however he pronounces that name, on WildC.A.T.s, and then shortly afterwards when Alan Moore came on board.
Yeah, absolutely. And I certainly jumped on when I heard James Robinson was writing WildC.A.T.s. I have a lot of fondness for his run, and going through to Alan Moore's run, I thought they were both doing top-notch work and very enjoyable.
I didn't latch on to the Robinson at first. What had happened is I read an issue, I thought it was okay, it wasn't enough to really grab me. Then a few months later, Alan Moore was announced, and I was fishing around for a new universe because I'd been put off by Marvel so thoroughly that I wanted a new home. And so I figured I would try the whole Wildstorm Rising crossover, and Alan Moore was doing, I think Robinson handed off to Alan Moore during that crossover. And so I went back and I read the James Robinson issues, was much more impressed with the successive issues. And then with Alan Moore, I loved it. And given that one of my North Star titles at Marvel for years and years was X-Men, and it seemed like Moore was doing his own take on a X-Men type property, and it felt like going back to the X-Men during its glory days, and that's part of why I really, really loved Alan Moore's run, and that also got me to try a bunch of other Wildstorm books. None of the other books really took, but I did stick with WildC.A.T.s through Alan Moore's run, run and unfortunately a little bit afterwards.
Yeah, but I do recall that it happens very rarely in the comic collecting that you hear that a title is really good, and it's one that's just been under the radar, one that you've ignored. But I kept hearing that StormWatch had gotten really good at some point, and this would have been after Wildstorm Rising, I imagine. Oh, no, during. No, after. Yes. So I'd heard that it was good, and then, there was just more and more buzz around it, but I never really jumped on until they released trades, and by that stage, I think the authority was sort of a twinkle in Warren Ellis's eye at that point from turning StormWatch into... I recently read all of StormWatch, and it's a terrible title up until Warren Ellis takes over. Like, it really is just bland and posturing and tedious.
Yeah, last year I read the run up to the Warren Ellis period in hopes of doing that for a Spawnometer, covering it for a Spawnometer. And it's one of those things that kind of breaks you, is that you go through that effort and then you can't get it together to actually get the episode. And then your memories of it start to dim further and further, especially with age. And it's like, I read 30 odd comics, 40 comic books, most of them not very good at all. And then I'm going to have to find some way of trying to recollect that material in another 6 months or a year or so when we finally get around to doing an episode on it. I didn't probably hate it as much as you did, in part because I really have an affection for the concept of international heroes, and that carried me more, but it's not great. There's very little of it particularly good. A lot of it is, as you said, tedious and trying to get through. There were threads of things that could have been interesting that, of course, never get played out, because that's Image's whole deal was, here's an idea that you could see somebody doing something with, and nobody's ever going to explore it properly, and it's just going to get dropped and forgotten about. I mean, the whole thing with WildC.A.T.s is in part that they were supposed to be corporate superheroes, that they were basically working for this corporation, and it took until Joe Casey before anybody ever explored that material, and by then I was already gone.
Yeah, and what a great run that was. Yeah. StormWatch has the facade of international superheroics, but there's no depth to it. There's no understanding of the world, or, it's very much, this country is where this, scene is set inside a nuclear reactor and everything like that. And it had no, I don't know, there was nothing behind it. It was, so superficial.
This character has a Japanese flag on their suit, and this character has a Russian flag on their suit. That's basically as far as that can go. Oh, he's ex-KGB. He must be a tough guy.
Yeah.
And then even when it came to Wildstorm Rising, as you said, that was when they had the fill-in guys, essentially. It wasn't even the guys who had been doing Stormwatch for a period of time there. It were some guys who did like a couple or 3 issues, and they were crud, and I just never came back to it. But then what happened is I was running a comic shop by the time the Warren Ellis stuff was happening, and we would have strip cover returns for late books, and sometimes it was. So I ended up reading the book through some of those strip covers and seeing that, yeah, they were definitely doing some interesting stuff here. Definitely some Watch Mini type things were going on there. In fact, they overtly were showing that. It was a lot of that. What ended up happening with Planetary, where they were getting into the analogs and getting into paralleling prior works and homaging those works, and then using that as a way to develop the characters. So it was an interesting thing that he was doing while also being kind of familiar at the same time, thanks to Alan Moore.
Yeah, and Warren Ellis was basically, the myth of the story is that no one was buying Stormwatch, but the production staff thought it was brilliant and kept it going because they wanted to know what was happening. And whether that's true or not, that's a good story to tell about the history of that series. And Warren Ellis basically threw them a bone by restarting the series with a new #1. And he was also lucky enough to get Brian Hitch on board and Paul Neary on the art team. And they really, Warren Ellis can be incredibly wanky and write things that are just on the nose. But when you've got Brian Hitch art behind it, you can put up with it. The dialogue, will really sing when there's something really substantial to look at.
Yeah, I love Tom Rainey's artwork, but as you noted, the book wasn't getting out there that much. I wasn't having access to it that much, and what I read, while I liked it, wasn't enough for me to invest in it as a full cover price book. But Rainey, I love so much that it could have gotten me over the hump. But as you said, they relaunched the book, but the relaunch was with Oscar Hynes, who stuff I like okay, but he's not somebody who's going to get me onto a book. Like if they relaunched it as a new #1 with Tom Rainey, I might have gone ahead and made the commitment. With Oscar Hynes, it wasn't going to happen. And it was during the Hynes run that Brian Bryan Hitch comes in. Of course, the book looks fantastic after that, and you could see that they had something there. It just wasn't going to be StormWatch, and that's how you end up with The Authority, another relaunch, this time with Bryan Hitch, and that's where you get the characters that are getting adapted into a movie next year.
Yeah, and aren't we nervous about that?
I wish I was less so, but yeah, I am nervous about that. It's true. As you noted, you read through StormWatch, you read through Authority. Did you ever read any of the Wildcat stuff after Alan Moore left?
Let's see. Yes, I definitely read all of that, and I have it all in trades. So that starts up with Scott Lobdell, I think, picks it up, and then Joe Casey takes over and writes it until the end of Wildcats 3.0. So yeah, I have all that stuff, and really enjoy Wildcats 3.0. I mean, it was just such a bold new take and pushed the concept really cleverly as far as it could go, I thought. And also, I mean, at the same time, Sleeper sort of spun out of the Alan Moore stuff by using the villain Tau in a very clever way. Yeah, it all works really well. It doesn't work very well when you stick it in the DC universe, but it really works well outside.
Yeah. Now, I think if I remember correctly, this book came out during that period when Alan Moore left and Brandon Choi was doing the title. And that was leading up to issue 50, and then the relaunch that you mentioned with Scott Lobdell and Charest. Did you read any of that Brandon Choi stuff?
No.
Yeah, wise. No. So before we come back to that, let's talk about your experience with the Aliens franchise.
Yes. When the first Alien film came out, it was one that was just notorious to talk about on the playground. Like, there was a few kids who had seen it. Like, I was 79, I was 11. And I think I learned the most about the Alien film by flicking through the Walter Simonson adaptation in a comic shop, actually in a bookshop. The Galaxy bookshop in Sydney. And yeah, that's answered most of my questions about what happened in that film. But when the Aliens came out, I already knew who James Cameron was. I was probably a fan. So yeah, I went and saw Aliens. I probably saw it about 6 times at the cinema when it first came out. It was my favourite film to take people to who hadn't seen it, because it was such a roller coaster ride of a movie. Really adored that. And then, yeah, I've seen every single Alien film since then. Some are worth talking about, some aren't. And then I just saw Romulus, which is a greatest hits package.
Did you ever carry over into the comic books?
Yes. So I would have read a lot of the Dark Horse stuff. Probably, I definitely bought the first issue when it was on its own title. It started in Dark Horse Presents, didn't it?
Well, I think that they had the first miniseries, and then they started doing stories in Dark Horse Presents, and they kind of went back and forth for a while there. Yeah,
so I kind of dabbled with a lot of it. I think probably the one that got me off it was the Chris Claremont one, I think. Yeah, I definitely kept an eye on Alien and Predator through that time in the comics, but none of it seemed wonderful. And definitely, I read other crossovers like Superman Alien and Batman Predator and things like that. Yeah, so I definitely kept an eye on crossovers and read them and bought some of them.
Were you a Predator guy too?
I was a Predator guy. Did I buy the comics of those? I think I wasn't interested by then. I think there's just a lot of product around that time. I was probably full on buying Ultraverse by then and picking and choosing where my dollar went. Yeah.
So you said you also were going to read Wildcats Aliens?
Oh yes. Yeah.
Okay. So did that happen?
Yeah, I reread that. I reread that after you mentioned it. Yes, it's
that was definitely bonus round material. So tell me this: despite the fact that the book is called Wildcats Aliens, there is a large amount of StormWatch in this book. It's kind of a key StormWatch book, in fact. Now, I know that you were a Wildstorm guy, but I'm not sure exactly of the timeline. Did you read the StormWatch material prior to the Warren Ellis run? What is your relationship with StormWatch?
I read the first few, despite not liking Scott Clark's art. Rest in peace, no disrespect, not a massive fan. So I drifted away from it, and I don't think he stayed around too long either. But the first issue was always really attractive to me, that Jim Lee inking himself. I think that battalion design was really interesting with that big glass dome that didn't quite cover him, slightly pointless looking big glass dome. And then there was the StormWatch annual, which Dwayne Turner drew, which sort of sucked me in again because that was a very dynamic style. And then I was curious about StormWatch because it was in the Image 25 project, whatever that was, 24 issues late, or I can't remember what it's called.
Images of Tomorrow.
Yes, Yes, Images of Tomorrow. So StormWatch was the Wildstorm part of that idea. I was sort of very curious to see how they went around getting there. But just the creative teams, I don't even remember. Was it Steve Gerber? And then I don't know who drew it. I mean, I've got very little frame of reference beyond the fact that I didn't care about StormWatch until Warren Ellis and Tom Rainey came onto it. And then I was very interested, and it happened to coincide with Supreme by Alan Moore. So you had these two things going on in two different parts of Image, where they'd gone, I think our comic might be shit. Let's get writers and maybe interesting artists on board. And of course, the interesting artist thing didn't carry through for Supreme until about 12 issues later. But Tom Rainey was a really interesting artist to suddenly appear at Wildstorm and made that book a lot more interesting. So that was about the point I started. Stormwatch 37 was about the point that I started paying attention to Stormwatch again.
Yeah, Rainey, I don't think has ever gotten his due, probably because he never had a particularly long run on a particularly visible book. But going back to at least Uncanny X-Men, I just loved his stuff, and I think that he's still drawing at a level as good as he ever did. You know, I don't think that he's lost any of his potency, and it bothers me that he will occasionally draw a book. Like I know not too long ago he helped with the most recent Cyborg relaunch, and they didn't even let him do the covers. They had somebody else doing the covers on that.
Yeah, that was outrageous.
Yeah, and I think I pre-ordered that trade. I don't know, it may not be his best work. I haven't looked at it yet. I have trouble imagining that it's not great looking work though, because I've not ever seen him give less than his best. I just don't understand why he never got to be a bigger name. I don't know why they didn't bring him into Image sooner. I don't know why he didn't get something higher profile at Marvel or at Image. Maybe there was some kind of fuckery because he wasn't on the Uncanny X-Men for very long. It seemed like there was some pretty big gaps in his resume, so I don't know. But all I do know is like he still produces lots of pinups that he puts on like social media and stuff, and he just continues to blow me away, and I'm just super impressed with what he's still able to do this late in his career. Certainly the Stormwatch stuff was excellent, and he definitely helped to raise their profile, but at the same time he left the book about a year before people really started to give a shit, before it really exploded and became Authority. And I don't think the Authority would have become Authority without Brian Hitch, because that widescreen style, I mean, came to define what comics were for a number of years there, and it definitely defined what the Authority was, and I don't think Rainey would have done that. But what Rainey did on Stormwatch was incredible, and the fact that he's having to do it for issues 38 or whatever through 50, and then there's that gap with Oscar Jimenez doing the second run of Stormwatch before it became the Authority. It just seems like he kept getting buried and never celebrated the way I felt he should have been.
I feel like the biggest sort of flashpoint for Tom Rainey career-wise was Mutant X at Marvel. So he did that. You remember that kind of Exiles type? It was like
Matt's younger brother
focused.
collected the book, and obviously the Rainey artwork got my attention, so I made sure to flip through every issue as it came through. But at the same time, it was really a glorified What If for the most part, aside from the presence of the poor Havoc for a period of time before he comes back. And every now and again you'll get a reference to Blood Rain, but it was the sort of thing where it had a following, it sold reasonably well, but it's not Uncanny X-Men. You know, it's like, and I'm sure a lot of what made Mutant X popular at the time was Rainey's presence on the book in those early issues.
But he didn't do Uncanny X-Men.
He did.
What did he do on Uncanny?
He followed Will Portacio.
No.
Yeah.
Oh, what? For like 3 issues?
Right, he wasn't on there for terribly long. I'll grant you, because he was the guy who drew the book between Will Portacio and Brandon Peterson, and he did have a few other guys between those two, but he was the guy who did those handful of issues. But then he's not doing anything for a long period of time. It seemed like I don't remember what he did.
No, fair enough.
In those wilderness years between Uncanny and Stormwatch. Then of course he goes from Stormwatch to I think Mutant X, and I don't recall what he did between there. I think at some point, again with the Scott Clark connection, I think at some point he took over one of the Alpha Flight runs, didn't he?
Yeah, I don't know. He did Warlock. I'd forgotten about the fact that he did.
He did do Warlock for a while there, didn't he? Right? Because it was Angel Medina, and then he took it over, didn't he? The Warlock and the Infinity Watch.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
So
again, another instance where he has to follow up another guy and doesn't get to launch the book on his own and get the attention from that. And it just kills me because you'd think that if nothing else, you'd think that somebody like DC would snatch him up to do a Bat book, just to have somebody who's in that sort of Image domain, and it just never happened for him. It's so weird.
Yeah, it feels like DC on some sort of point of principle, we're never going to descend to that level. We're just going to get our current artists to amend their style as much as possible. But yeah, Tom Rainey, weirdly, I feel like the biggest spotlight Tom Rainey's style has had is the guy who drew Immortal Hulk just riding his style hard. What's his name?
You're talking about Joe
the guy
Bennett?
who ended it, Joe Bennett, who had chopped and changed styles throughout the last sort of 25 years. Once he hit Immortal Hulk, to me, that Immortal Hulk was just like, that's just like if Tom Rainey drew Hulk. And the whole, it was quite funny to me that the star that he landed on was yet another, because Joe Bennett had never had an original style in his career as far as I'm aware. And then that Hulk was pure Tom Rainey, and then was probably the most successful comic that Tom Rainey could have had if he'd actually drawn it.
I'm sure that they would have preferred if it were Tom Rainey at this point. They would have saved them
In
some
retrospect,
PR
yeah.
troubles, yeah. But you also wouldn't have gotten the better part of 50 issues out of Tom Rainey. Yeah, he's just
No, exactly. You got 3.5.
Yeah, I've liked Joe Bennett in the past. I liked his stuff on Birds of Prey. He was the saving grace of the mostly bad run of Captain America and the Falcon.
Okay.
And he's another guy who, there's not a lot of guys who draw in that familiar Bronze Age style that tweaks that Gen X itch for me. So I liked him, and then he kind of blew that, unfortunately, because I was actually happy for him to finally get some attention. But I've never read Immortal Hulk. I only know it by reputation, and I had not noted how much of a chameleon he was. More so, like, I know he was a kind of a Roger Cruz wannabe, which itself is kind of a sad thing to say. But like in the day, like when he was doing Supreme, he definitely had a Roger Cruz look to his stuff. But I've never really analyzed his overall catalog of work to recognize that. I mostly just had these periods of time where I was reading his stuff and liked what I saw. And now that I think about it, there was maybe a little Aaron Lopresti in that stuff that I just referenced.
Yes.
But I'd have to look at it closely to see if he was borrowing from people or if he was a chameleon in the way that you were talking about. I didn't see it, but I'm not familiar enough with his overall work to have really been looking for it. I was just like, after multiple issues of Bart Sears just drawing whatever the fuck on Captain America and the Falcon, rendering the story incomprehensible, it was just nice for somebody to follow the plot. You know?
Yeah, I don't think he's a swiper, but he's a
well, it's just
he's someone who can lean into a style.
Just a sponge, I guess you could say.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, back to Tom Rainey. That was those like early Stormwatch, like 37 through 43 or whatever. Because it again, Tom Rainey didn't last long on it. But those kind of essentially one and done issues, which were Warren Ellis's thing of grabbing onto the new scientist story of the week and turning it into a story made for something pretty fresh at the time of just like oh, we go. It was almost like his Global Frequency was those early Stormwatch where it was like an issue. Oh, there's a virus broken out in downtown Detroit, and we think it's come from this, and so that would be this story done in one. And so he got away with that for a few issues with Stormwatch, but then once Tom Rainey sort of left, it got a little bit wibbly wobbly. I think there was a Hynes issue in there as well. But yeah, it didn't coalesce until Brian Hitch came on.
So that being the case, did you last through like Change or Die and then into the Oscar Jimenez run? Were you still sticking with it, or did you have a gap?
No, I did. I liked Oscar Jimenez an awful lot when he was on form. His two JLA issues were great. Mm-hmm. His little bit of Flash was really interesting. There was something to him. There was a bit of a Pacheco vibe to it, but then it just got really lazy and then just evaporated. It was he clearly wasn't up to the task of regular comics, and nor was he good enough to justify special projects. So it didn't last long. But no, I read Stormwatch from 37 onwards, and then all the way through to Authority 26 or whatever. Yeah, I was on board I was along for the ride.
It's funny because you would think that Change or Die would have been the big turning point, but it's actually WildC.A.T.s Aliens. That's when everything changes, and it's such I love the audacity that I guess Wildstorm was going to do the crossover that mattered, even though as a result of that, they probably have, I don't know if this has ever been reprinted. I'd have to go and look to see.
It was eventually. It took a long time and was a little bit of a premium book because of it, but it was eventually, and then probably not again, but there is at least one or two collections that include this book.
Yeah, you don't happen to have a copy of the Stormwatch Final Orbit trade, do you?
I don't, but I know who does. Why do you ask?
Well, because I'm looking at Xenopedia, and what they're saying is that the story was collected in that collection, but they excised all the images of the Xenomorph. So I'm wondering if they created new art to bridge that, if they had text pieces, if they altered the artwork. I'm wondering, because it doesn't make sense, because the cover even has the Xenomorph on it. Like, I guess you could argue, that no, that's not a Xenomorph. It just looks like a Xenomorph, but it's clearly a Xenomorph head on the cover, drawn by Brian Hitch. So but again, they say that they're not in the book itself. itself. So I'm just wondering what, chicanery came into play to make this thing happen, if it happened the way they say it does.
Yeah, I've got a mate who I know has those, so I can find out for you. But that is weird, especially considering that the cover's got like the guy from what do you call it? Deep Space Nine or whatever.
Oh, sure, Avery Brooks, yeah. Yeah, Brian Hitch never met a likeness he couldn't enjoy putting into comic books. Yes, this is yeah, and then the cover of the trade's got Grifter on it, so I think they're making sure, but it's Grifter without his mask on, so he just looks like kind of a guy who's maybe didn't get a lot of sleep the previous night. It's kind of odd. Yeah, but yeah. It just makes
you very conscious that the TV series Lost didn't exist yet. Otherwise, it would have been. It would have been the guy who's a bit like Gambit in Lost. What's his name? The kind of grifter character on that.
I know of whom you speak, but I never watched Lost, so I'm not as familiar.
Oh, no.
Like, I know the actors that were already famous who came onto the show, but because I never watched the show, the actors from that show never became famous to me, except like Matthew Fox because he beat his wife and stuff like that.
Oh, I missed that. Yeah. Okay.
Of course, you bought the book when it came out. Then
yes,
I think that the Moore run would have probably been over by then. I think it was the return of Brandon Choi, and I think maybe Ed Bennis was drawing it, and I gave that a few issues and hated it.
Yeah.
It was off. But the premise of knowing that I was going to get the Wildcats with the aliens, and it was going to be written by Warren Ellis, drawn by Chris Sprouse, who's inked by Kevin Nowlan. It was just like layer upon layer of reasons for me to come back to Wildcats for this one book at least. And I was not disappointed.
It's a wicked comic. It's so much better than... I love comics that are better than they have any right to be, And this falls squarely in that category.
Yeah, again, every fan for so many of these projects has an image of what they're going to get when they hear about it. And it's never fulfilled for the most part, with rare exceptions. I think that one of the reasons why people got so excited about Batman Predator is because it met and exceeded their expectations then. And I would say, like, when I read Aliens vs. Predator, I was so pleasantly surprised that it was so good and so much better than any of the movie attempts at that were. And so I could see where the fans would be, the fans in the time period would have been ecstatic over that. But then there's been a bunch of these, and not that long ago I covered Batman Aliens. That wasn't anything to write home about for the most part. Even with Bernie Wrightson, that wasn't anything that I was doing cartwheels over.
That made me laugh.
Yeah.
Your show on that made me laugh a lot, because I picked it up as a trade paperback just like 2 or 3 months ago, because I'd read it at the time and thought the whole idea of the combination was really fucking stupid. And then I was like, but it's Bernie Wrightson, so I must have, at least it's got good art. And there are moments, but by and large it's quite odd, later career Bernie Wrightson. So I reread it and thought, it was okay, just a bit rubbish, just a bit empty. And then listening to you and your military pal to take it apart, I was like, yeah, baby. It was just awful. So it really made me laugh to listen to that particular lens. It's like if you came at it from like a typical comics fanboy approach of like, has it got big fighty bits in it, then you might be okay. But once you actually, and similar to the Predator Hell and Hot Water, that thing of like faux, I've seen a film once, military speak, that just, as soon as you sort of try and take it remotely seriously, you realise how stupid it all is. Was quite funny. So yeah, your episode on that and the take of your mate in particular was wickedly entertaining.
Well, and it's one of those things too where, again, hand raising, just a common pathetic fanboy. If I'm reading the military speak and I don't think it rings true, imagine what a drill to the teeth it is for somebody who actually knows how these guys should be talking and acting. So I mentioned in the episode, I was so glad that he didn't love this material too, because I don't enjoy. I don't want to bring in some raving Batman fan who's like, oh man, this is so awesome, this is so cool, I can't wait to talk about it, I'm so happy, and then I just shit all over it. But if we can both join in the shitting, that's just awesome. That's exactly what I'm here for the bad books at least. But that's not a problem here. This is a really cool book. It's weird though, because again, it says Wildcats aliens, and yet it's such an alien story because you've got a team going into a situation, getting what happened put together piece by piece, and everything that matters happened to StormWatch, and they're not listed in the credits at all. There's 2 covers on this book. They're on neither one of those covers. You've got Gil Kane doing his cover where he's drawing some wackadoo Silver Age alien because nobody bothered to tell. Like, the irony of him clearly having reference for the most modern zealot costume. So Gil Kane faithfully renders this fairly lame Wonder Woman knockoff that Jim Lee created a few years earlier. He nails that. And they just say, oh, an alien. Okay, I can draw an alien. And it looks like an Atari Force, you know. And they're like, oh God, we're going to have to get Kevin to redraw this whole thing, aren't we? Just classic. Oh my God. And then of course, it's not yet StormWatch. I mean, sorry, it's not yet The Authority. You know, I know Brian Hitch came on the latter issues of StormWatch, so he was already drawing it by that point. So maybe Ellis was seeing what he was able to do and anticipating the widescreen approach. But spending multiple pages with an escape capsule making its way into the Earth's atmosphere and plowing through a city street, that's not a number of pages that you would normally allocate for a project like this. Most of the time, they're trying to pack it with a bunch of fan stuff, and this was just, no, we're having a cinematic moment. We're going to spend a bunch of pages on this capsule, but it works. And I love that they knew how much space they could allot to make sure that this had that cinematic feel to it. And then again, despite this book being Wildcats investigating what happens to Stormwatch, the actual storytelling mechanics resonate for Aliens fans because they're hitting the beats you expect them to beat in this type of project. So it very much is the Wildcats are stuck in an Aliens movie and reacting the way the Wildcats would. They're bringing out their swords. Maul's getting his hands burned because he thinks he can just pick these things up and manhandle them. And guess what, buddy? No, acid burned you too. Stuff like that. You love it when your heroes act like they're in a comic book and they don't know that they're in a horror movie and they have to face the repercussions of that. When Wildcats Aliens was happening, had you already committed to Stormwatch? Were you already following the book? And so was it a natural progression to go into this special?
No, I never actually got to read it at the time. It was one of those issues that I was ignoring it probably because I thought this is out of continuity. And I think it was probably under-ordered and in high demand because I don't think I ever saw that comic in the wild. And I finally read it when I got the Stormwatch Final Orbit trade, which collected it, which came after The Authority had been launched. So, yeah, I think that's when I first read it. Yeah, definitely in that trade. And I remember there being a lot of will they, won't they about republishing it because it required special negotiation. And because of that, that's the only time it's been collected that I know of, unless it was in Dark Horse DC crossover issues. I'm not sure.
I do think that they included this in one of those big Dark Horse DC collections as well. I think, but I'd have to go do the research and plug that in later on.
Yeah, so that was when I first read it, and that would have been after Authority had become, such a hit. It's funny delving into your memory and trying to say, I did this at this time and that sort of thing. It's a lot of mythologizing in your own memories, isn't there?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've got a whole show where that's all I do is like, okay, it's March of 1986. What did I watch? What was I listening to? For me, I think it's like probably a good idea for me to try to recall these things now while I still can, and maybe the recollection will help to prevent me from going senile later on.
Yeah. Well, that was one of the things too growing up, is mostly if a movie came out and was a big deal, it had already been out for a few months before it came to Australia. So you tended to get a lot of buzz for things, and they would time releases in Australia to be friendly for, to maximise the profit. So they'd aim for the holiday seasons for certain films. But pretty much everything came out, months after it had been in America.
Yeah, my Al's Mexican, so there's trends that didn't catch on for years down there. So especially when it comes to like fashion and musical styles and stuff, there's this lag that we used to have.
Yeah.
You had already been reading Authority by the time, so you kind of had a sense of what to expect with this book once you got your hands on it?
Yeah, definitely. And it had its own reputation. So, I knew this was the story that mattered to the, the transition from Stormwatch to The Authority. And, crazy to put so much that is critical to one storyline in this intercompany crossover. So it's still, I think it's really ballsy that it happened that way. Ellis didn't write a throwaway story if you care about Stormwatch, and then Stormwatch isn't even featured in the title description. So yeah, it's really interesting.
Well, it's cool because it is kind of a backdoor pilot. I mean, I think in the book itself, it's like, hey, you just read us slaughtering an entire superhero team. You want to check the aftermath? Stormwatch number 11. It was a really good like stealth backdoor pilot, stealth advertising advertising for this thing, because obviously Wildcats, maybe less so, definitely the Aliens, the combination of the two is going to get new eyes onto this that you wouldn't be able to get from another StormWatch relaunch. And I guess being that it's Image Comics at the time, it's Wildstorm, this is back when these guys could do what they want to. They didn't have to go asking all their lawyers and all their company yes men what they could and could not do. It's just like, hey, would it be cool if we actually did a crossover that mattered, that had an impact on continuity more so than a Boomerang hitting Spawn and he's got laces in his face for 25 issues. Let's do something that's really going to make a difference and launch a book. But as you say, that gave it that reputation. It's like there's very few intercompany crossovers that really truly matter, and you're basically just getting off on, hey, Superman and Spider-Man are talking to each other. Hey, that's cool. This was like, no, this is a pivotal moment in continuity for one of the, I won't say it's the main title, because as you said, StormWatch wasn't a huge seller. I think that it's kind of a joke though, talking about how poorly the Wardell stuff was selling, because I was always shocked looking at the numbers how well StormWatch did relative to most comic books. I think that it only sold poorly in comparison to what Image expected from their books, whereas it's a solid top 100 and I think a solid top 50 book up to that point. So it wasn't a piker. So it wasn't like they took some super obscure group and killed them all off in this crossover. It's not that anybody was like having tattoos of Fahrenheit on their arm or anything. There's no closet winter fans out there, but it did matter in terms of this is a book that's still selling units and we're going to affect the continuity of our universe with this. You get street cred off of something like this.
Yeah. And I guess it was coupled with some good character work too, because I mean, at some point, and this may just be because of the Brian Hitch art, but turning Battalion into Captain Sisko from Deep Space Nine happened somewhere along the way. And when you see that character, suddenly he has Avery Brooks's voice in your head, which he before that the character was just a bit all over the place, like never really had. He was kind of like the main character in Stormwatch and the one through most of the action was seen through. But yeah, I mean, he had no real characterization other than worried about his brother. That was kind of the only thing he had going for him.
He was really sad that his first team got messed up and feeling a bunch of guilt about that. It was weird to me too, because you had two notable teams at Image with African-American leaders who were all teched out and stuff, and I thought they were both armored action heroes. And then when I go to read Stormwatch, it's like, he's a telekinetic? Why does he have a bucket on his head if he's a telekinetic? It's just strange choices here. But yeah, there wasn't a whole lot to the guy, and he basically was whatever the story needed him to be up until that point.
Yeah. The other nice change was taking the role of Weatherman in Stormwatch, and this is going back before the crossover, but making Henry Bendix a psychotic bad guy was kind of ballsy, because it's like no one ever thought to do anything interesting with these characters till Warren Ellis put his mind to it.
Getting into the book itself, though, now you read it a little bit after the fact, so you knew sort of what to expect. So having it have a reputation precede it, how did it hold up against that reputation?
It's a real gear change, because I expected it to be a lot more about Stormwatch than it is, but it's really seen through the eyes of the Wildcats and the fact that they are the ones who go and investigate the problem, and Stormwatch are really offline throughout it all. Warren Ellis loved to start stories with destruction raining on a city and the shuttle coming down in New York and effing things up is just classic Warren Ellis. But I liked all their reasoning, and they always have this lens of they're looking at everything through their war lens, so the Cherubim and the Daemonites, and so they're going, oh, okay, the aliens at a glance look a bit like Daemonites, so it must be a Daemonite infestation on the space station. So they go up there with these expectations, and then everything's much worse than they imagine. And I mean, I like the fact that all the alien stuff has happened off screen, so now we're just seeing after it's really gotten bad, instead of the classic creeping around, what's this, oh, it's on my face, oh no, and then time passes and things get worse. It does all that off camera, so I kind of like that process, and the fact that superheroes are much more formidable than regular people, so they do have some sort of fighting chance against the aliens. But just the fact that there's so many aliens, and the fact that alien acid blood seems to hurt superheroes much more than most things do. But I mean, it's a ballsy move to have so many of the main Stormwatch players dead by the time this story begins.
Well, and it's also cool because we've seen this play out so many times before, where you've got people walking into a situation and it's a bunch of asparagus people, to borrow a term from Jim Shooter, where it's just a bunch of people that were only existed to be dead anyway, and you don't know them and they don't matter to to you. And this is an instance where it's like, well, I read 50 issues, 60 issues of stories about these characters, and they're the ones whose bodies are lining the walls and stuff. These are the ones who've been wiped out. I know these people. This if you're a StormWatch reader, this would matter to you. It's really nice to where it's not like Hadley's Hope where there's maybe one or two people that you would care about, but mostly it's just down to Newt. It's like, no, you know every single one of these people, and the Wildcats know these people to an extent. And because the Wildcats have full plot armor, because you know that they're going to be going back into their book whole, you have to take that threat out on somebody, and StormWatch very well fulfills that role of like, okay, we know how dangerous these people are because these people aren't around anymore.
Yeah, and I mean, as well as the superheroic characters in StormWatch, you've got all this support staff, so there's plenty of warm bodies up there just to churn out regular aliens.
Well, yeah, and for the most part, the people who were involved in this story, they're retired for at least a period of time. They eventually, once Authority blows up, they do go back to Jackson King and Synergy and some of the other characters, but that's a spin-off of Authority by that point. It's like this is really the end of StormWatch and most of the characters associated with StormWatch. They'd already, again, in StormWatch backdoored the Authority, so they knew that there was an evolution coming out of this, but the actual core characters and the characters featured in this particular story aren't going to be around after this for the most part, at least not in the form that we recognize them as. They're going to be members of the Monarchy or StormWatch PhD or whatever.
Yeah, and I mean, Monarchy was just a cash grab from probably a two-sentence idea of Warren Ellis's.
That was painful. So, I tried to jump on the Monarchy and that hurt. That was not a good ride.
Yeah.
So
I remember all the British fans just loving it because it was so British.
Now, how about like the actual story and artwork in the book, though?
Yeah, Chris Sprouse is, I mean, he's not a legend at this point, but gosh, he's a solid, reliable storyteller, and not super flashy, but gets the job done really well, I thought. The superheroes are very chunky, which I appreciate, but I mean, aliens look on model. There's some nice reveals with aliens coming out of the dark. I mean, I particularly think that when they find Fahrenheit and she's just shrouded in shadow, and then, you know, the closer they get, they can see, oh, there's a bit of guts hanging out of her, and then there's an alien sort of holding her like a prize that he just won, and then that alien spews out the fire breath, and you know, that's a great moment, and one that probably doesn't mean a lot to Wildcats fans who haven't been reading Stormwatch.
Yeah, with Chris Sprouse, I became familiar with him through his Legion work, and especially because I went on to read the Archie Legion with the Moys and such, and Lee Moyer, where they had that cartoony quality to it, that Archie quality to it, and I always kind of figured that's all Chris Sprouse was going to be, was the guy who did the teeny characters, the bright and shiny characters, and so it was really interesting to see his career progress, where he got more of a heroic posture, more iconic quality to his work, especially on books like Supreme and Tom Strong, where he became such a classical superhero and adventure hero type of artist. I do wish that stuff like the Supreme material was in print so people would have a greater access to it and could see some of what I think is his best stuff. But I think he works really well here, and the guy who was doing Legion back in the early 90s, while still a good artist, I never would have thought he'd been capable of committing to this kind of horror. And certainly having Kevin Nowlan inking him didn't hurt any. Yeah.
And as an aside, I mean, I've been making my collection smaller and smaller, but I do have the full Supreme run sitting in a box that's marked forever. So.
Yeah, that's something where you can't rely on being able to ever replace any of that stuff. They've never had a comprehensive collection of it anyway, so if you don't keep your floppies, you're just not going to have that material. You can't even rely on getting a digital copy.
Well, I mean, the one time they did reprint it, everyone just complained about the quality of the reprint.
Yeah,
so.
The Checker stuff, that was not a good house. I can see why those guys didn't stick around, because I ended up reading Judgment Day as a Checker book, and just everything about it was ugly. You know, I mean, the paper stock was okay, but the choices they made with it, the fact that they used like Photoshop on a panel to create the cover for the thing, it's just like, the I don't know what the thought process was with a lot of this type of stuff. So no, the Checker stuff didn't complete the run anyway, and I doubt that's a publisher I'd want to have the books from. And my understanding is they're pretty valuable right now, because there's not any collections out there. You have to settle for Checker, so people are paying a bunch of money for it's probably a fairly substandard collection.
Yeah, and it's one of those unfinished comic works anyway that the story just sort of stops rather than completes itself.
What are you talking about? There's those Eric Larson issues that wrapped it up, didn't it? Well, and as a Supreme person, you may know more. I know that what was planned for Glory ended up becoming Promethea. Did they ever port any of the Supreme stuff over into the America's Best Comics and resolve it there? Or was it just completely left to rot?
No, but I've got outlines for like 8 or 9 Youngblood issues that never came out and things like that. So
sorry.
Yeah.
When Alan Moore quits something, he quits it hard.
Yeah, he sure does.
So you want a monologue on Wildcats Aliens?
Oh, I mean, I think it's like a lot of Warren Ellis stuff where the first half sells you a promise that the second half can't keep is how I felt. And to be fair, I only recently read it. I didn't read it when it came out, but I've heard about it so much. It was like the biggest deal when it came out. Everybody was like, oh, if you're not reading Warren Ellis on Wildstorm books, what are you doing? I did start reading them with Planetary and Authority. So that's where I entered. And I only recently read the Wildcats crossover. I think the art was great. I think the first half of the story was A+. It did an incredible job of establishing the Wildcats. If you didn't know who they were, it did a great job of establishing tension and showing that the aliens, the xenomorphs, were actually a threat. When it came to what actually happened on that space station, it had just been built up in my head for 30 years or whatever, 25 years, so much that it didn't match what I ended up reading when I finally got around to it. I thought it was going to be a bloodbath. I thought I was going to see like xenomorphs with different powers, and you were going to see all these weird StormWatch characters get taken out, and it didn't really play out that way. It was fine. It was great that they sent the aliens into the sun because that's what they would do to keep them out of the Wildstorm universe. The first half of the story was Wildcats in a really tense alien story, and I would have liked to have seen the second half be aliens in a superhero-y, explosive, outrageous Wildcat story, but it didn't really happen. So it wasn't bad. It just didn't meet the expectations I built up for myself over the years.
Yeah, I really think that you needed the element of surprise. When this came out, we'd already done DC versus Marvel, and they'd had a billion different crossovers by that point. It was just like a constant thing. It was an embarrassment of riches on that front because it seemed like at least once a quarter you had a big intercompany crossover, usually probably more like, once a month at least. And none of them mattered. None of them were remotely consequential. Most of them weren't particularly good either. And in that context, this was such a surprise because not only was it well done, and not only did it capture the vibes of both properties well, but it was very consequential to the ongoing narrative of the Wildstorm books when they had an ongoing narrative before they'd been rebooted 3 times over, proving once and for all their DC properties since they can't keep a continuity straight anymore. But yeah, knowing that this was the end of the StormWatch book and that they were going to relaunch another book out of the events of this, because going into the book you did not know that. You might have had some indication from solicitations, but nobody's expecting Wildcats Aliens to be where they're going to kill off the StormWatch team. So you need to be able to walk in that cold. If you know Bruce Willis is dead, the Sixth Sense just isn't going to have the same impact, right?
Right. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
And it helped too that this came out when I was still a retailer. I think this was one of the rarest. Usually I was going to be perfectly fine with selling somebody the Chase variant cover, but I do think I kept the Gil Kane, Kevin Nowlan cover for myself because it was just too cool. This was an exciting time in comics, and I was there selling this to people. I was actively reading Wildcats, I think, still at this time period. So I talked to you before when you expressed some lack of enthusiasm for the book, that there was a strong element of you had to be there. This isn't the book that it was back then anymore because this doesn't matter the way that it mattered in the time period, and it doesn't stand out the way that it did in that time period.
Yeah. I mean, it was good.
Well, and again, and it by reputation, so you're hearing it from people that were there and got excited and had your mind blown, and you can't have your mind blown this 25 years later.
Yeah, I was there on the ground floor for Wildcats JLA crossover.
I like this one better. I was there for that one too. I was very, very into JLA, and
I was.
I wish Chris Sprouse had drawn that one. I wish Chris Sprouse and Kevin Nowlan even better, but Val Simic's kind of hard for me to get excited to see Val Simic drawing the Wildcats.
Yeah.
Give me Travis Charvet drawing JLA and Wildcats. Oh yeah, then that would be a book that I'd be raving about all these years later. It's still a good story, but not with Val Simic's artwork, man. I can't get excited for that.
Yeah, I was not super impressed with that.
Well, ideally you want to see the JLA. This is a Wildstorm book, so ideally you want to see the JLA art elevated related to Wildstorm game, and instead the Wildcats were in the fill-in guy vein for JLA. This wasn't a win for us.
Yeah, they did. I mean, I don't even know if they'd had it fill-ins yet at that point, because wasn't it Blue Superman in there?
Yeah, it was Blue Superman. It was probably sometime in the realm of JLA Rock of Ages, maybe even before that. It was very early on that they did that.
Yeah. I thought that was going to be really cool. I thought it was going to be cool.
I mean, I still liked it. I enjoyed the story. It's just the art killed it for me. And these are Wildstorm characters. I expect better from you guys.
Yeah.
This was in a time period where, like, not too or much before that, you had guys like Dave Johnson were doing some of the story elements from the Alan Moore run on Wildcats. They had people in their stable. Brett Booth could have done that. That would have been pretty cool. There were guys that they still had available in that time period. There were Wildstorm guys that I'd love to have seen them do the JLA characters in that period. And no, I got the JLA Incarnations guy doing my Wildcats instead.
Was Joe Casey doing Wildcats when that came out? Or is that not yet?
Maybe. I'm a little fuzzy on the time frame. I think not. I really want to say that might have been during the Brandon Choi period. I think maybe like Al Rio or somebody was drawing Wildcats at the time. So it wasn't really, if it was that time period that I'm thinking of, or it could have been when they had the interminable gap between issues of Travis Charvet when Scott Lobdell was writing it. Because if I recall correctly, Casey came in to relieve Lobdell, and it wasn't until later on that we got to Wildcats 3.0 where it was like full Casey Phillips experience. I'm not sure where it falls in that time frame exactly. And
but that's
do you have a page?
Probably with the fire-breathing alien, because that was the one that hurt. I thought it was still headed where I thought it was headed at that point, because I thought we're gonna have aliens with all these Wildstorm powers messing around and fighting superhero War of the Worlds type of thing. But
that was a little bit of a tease, I'll admit. It's like you got that one moment and then like, okay, well now we're completely forget that happened.
Well, that's what I'm going through my head, like, who else do I remember in Stormwatch? Who's going to be dead here and have their powers in an alien? Nobody. So I didn't need to remember everything else Stormwatch.
I'm just picturing like you had Fuji, who was a gaseous form. So if you imagine an alien with like alien gas blowing at people, that would have been pretty cool.
Yeah, and that was a bummer because those two guys are just dead there. And they're like, yeah, they're dead gas beings. We're breathing them in, and like that whole we're breathing in their dead bodies. That's a Warren Ellis line. But wouldn't it be more Warren Ellis-y to figure out how a xenomorph kills somebody made of gas and then show us, not like in a hostile gore, I need my gore way, but just like a little bit more of that on the page would have been cool. I don't know, but I do know that it had a huge impact on people, and then people are still talking about it. We're still talking about it, so there you go.
Well, I'm excavating all this stuff. We're talking about kidnapped and survival, so yeah, Wildcats Alien is just par for the course.
I suppose.
So anything else with regard to the book?
I'm just going to flick through it. I did like the way that the story is completely partitioned. So you get the build-up for it in Stormwatch 10 and the aftermath in Stormwatch 11. But apart from seeing a fairly alien-looking asteroid, none of the alien stuff is actually in that story at all. And it's all, sort of referenced vaguely. So, I mean, it still doesn't work if you completely go from Stormwatch 10 to 11 and I'm getting the numbers wrong, from 11 to 12 without reading the crossover. Pretty much it's like, we're off to investigate this asteroid, and issue 12 opens with, look at all these graves. So, yeah, but I really like the issue. I think it's got a good sense of threat and menace and appropriate to a team that's very accomplished like the Wildcats are. Maul gets his hands really fucked up from, ripping an alien in half. Void, I think, spends quite a fair bit of time recuperating after getting bitten in the tummy, and everyone else fares pretty well. But it's kind of like the threat, like that Zealot is a really formidable character, and just the fact that she's going, oh, my blades are starting to devolve from all the acid, the blood that's been going on them, and usually they're not bothered by anything. That kind of feels like Wonder Woman going, oh, my lasso's starting to die. Yeah. Oh, and the Alien Queen, I mean, the art looks fantastic. The Alien Queen page is just magnificent. And I don't think they tackle the Queen. Oh, they lob grenades at her, don't they? Yeah. It's good. I mean, teleporting is pretty much the only way to survive these stories. stories, is, particularly if your teleporter is humanoid and you can move her around with you. But I mean, it ends with the Winter's sacrifice, chucking the StormWatch satellite into the sun. That's an effective way to wipe out the aliens, and they kept them off Earth. And the fact that Spartan can scan people without any thought of medical equipment, he can say, no, there's no aliens in all these people here. That's a good way to speed the story along and not have any of those, last page twists that are pretty common in alien stories. Yeah, but I think I have real enormous affection for this story, probably based on the significance it has to another story that I was invested in. But yeah, I think it's probably my favorite crossover with aliens in comics, when most of the stories, I do put a lot of weight on a story that matters and has consequences, and this one matters and has consequences. It's a good read and it looks real pretty.
Well, it's a thing too where at this point in my aliens coverage, it's pretty much crickets. It's like, haven't gotten and beat the bushes to find anybody who wants to talk about this stuff anymore. But this is the one book where people still reach out to me. It's like, hey, did you do WildC.A.T.s aliens? Yeah, can we talk about WildC.A.T.s aliens? So it's like, I think that says something about the title. It was meaningful for people. It is very cool. It does have that street cred. I do love too, like you said, that they hang a lampshade over the whole Daemonites / brood / xenomorphs. It's like, these are all kind of the same thing. So it's nice to have that acknowledged. And also it's kind of cool because, again, StormWatch is killed by aliens. Well, what aliens? It's like, you don't have to say. There's aliens came and killed them all. We know what aliens you mean. Copyright 20th Century Fox. But in a story sense, oh man, these aliens came and just killed a lot of us. Like, dang, okay, that's messed up that's how you end the series. But okay, you can still kind of make it work even without the special, but it's obviously going to be better with the special.
Yeah, in fact, there's even a preview of the story in the fact that StormWatch contacts another universe and they find a version of StormWatch there where the team had a xenobiological encounter, and you see Jackson King in that universe and his face is all scarred up. And you knowing what's coming down the pipe, you go, oh, aliens. But, they don't mention it there. But, clearly that was a dark day in the history of that StormWatch.
So was this a thing that they did in the second volume or something?
I think it's in the story that's collected as A Finer World, which is around issues 1 and 4, I think. 1 to 4, around there. Yeah, it's the start of that one.
Yes, I know I read some of the stuff from the first volume toward the end, but I had very little opportunity to read stuff from the second volume for whatever reason. I don't recall why, but I didn't get to read much of that stuff. Just the first volume.
Yeah. It kind of became hard to find once Authority took off.
Yeah.
Anything with Jenny Sparks became fairly hot.
Right. And that was all second volume, I think, right? No, that's not right. She was in the first volume. I remember because they dove all like.
Yeah, she's in the first volume.
Dave Gibbons ripped and everything. I remember all that stuff and all the flashbacks.
Yeah.
Okay, just get it straight in my head. Like you said, trying to remember where I was, when I was,
Yeah, it's Apollo and Midnight are sort of the late additions to the book.
You're one of my Colonial Marines guys. You're one of the guys that were there from the very beginning, and so it's like, okay, well, I need to at least extend you the invitation. I know, I don't think Ryan ever went and read any of that stuff, to my knowledge, so I figured he doesn't give a shit, but I thought you would give a shit, so that's like, let me at least ask you if you want to get in there, because I don't lack the material, but I don't have any of your material. I knew that was a book that you kind of dug on.
Yeah, what's funny is I never read that, I think, in real time, but I always liked the idea of it because I think even when I was making my own comics, I was always kind of like, oh, aliens are cool. So I remember I incorporated this arc where a bunch of my characters got killed by aliens. And then I don't know if I feel like I did that long before they did the whole StormWatch thing where they did the WildC.A.T.s aliens where they basically, murdered like half the team of StormWatch, basically making way for the Authority. But I remember I came to that fairly later. It wasn't something I read in real time because I think, when did that come out? In like 98 or something?
Yeah. I want to say it was roughly the same time period as the WildC.A.T.s X-Men stuff was going on.
Hey, Justin, did you ever read that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you like that, or did you care about the StormWatch characters? Was it like, whoa, they're dead, or was it just like, who cares? Like,
I liked it. I can't remember anyone dying that I was particularly, attached to or anything. But when I think I was telling you when I was decided to read like StormWatch from the beginning and go up to like the Authority, I was like, I remember you were telling me about it, and I was like, wait a minute, there's a WildC.A.T.s alien team up, and they kill off most of StormWatch. I was like, this sounds crazy, but I do remember reading it and mostly enjoying it.
Like I guess what I remember the most is because they, Wizard, and everybody else was pimping the hell out of the Authority, and like my buddy was like, oh yeah, we got to read this Authority thing, and we did. But then as I got deeper into it, I went, oh, I get it. The Authority spun out of StormWatch, and so I kept, I kind of kept going more and more in reverse, as I was reading, whatever the current issue of Authority was on at the time when we started getting into it. Because I remember we got like the trades of, all the Hitch stuff, and then I think by the time we were getting like floppies, it was when like Arthur Adams was doing the book like in the 20s or whatever. So we were getting the trades, we were getting the floppies, and then we realized like, oh wait, like you need to go back and read like StormWatch to figure out how they turned into the Authority. And then I think that's when I discovered the whole WildC.A.T.s aliens thing and went, whoa, this is super cool. Like, because it's like the aliens are killing the shit out of StormWatch. But I mean, I think that would basically be, without any prep and any reading or anything like that, that would be my kind of hot take on WildC.A.T.s aliens, that I did think it was cool because, like I always say, I'm a mark for crossovers and team ups and whatever. And like Aliens seems really, really ideally situated to do that horrible death cleanup for you, doesn't it? Oh, wait, we want to clean up and kill off a bunch of characters that we're not using and position these other characters to be really cool. It's like, what better way to do it than to say, okay, here are a bunch of aliens. Now we've used them to quote unquote clean up the chaff, and now you've got like Apollo and Midnighter positioned to roll into the Authority with Hawksmoor and the Engineer and all these guys, right? Like, so you're like, oh, okay, I guess that makes sense, right? Like, I mean, it seemed to make sense to me at the time, and I guess like I said, I haven't revisited it in many years, but I just remember it thinking it was cool. And I guess they made a big deal about the crossover, but like I felt like the thing that you didn't realize was that it was like a stealth, like in this issue, StormWatch dies, type thing, because that's what you're discovering, right? Like, so I was like, oh, that's weird that clearly they didn't, I feel like they knew that was coming, so they just used that as the springboard, right? So it's like it seems almost historical in a weird way. Like without that, you wouldn't have gotten, or maybe you would have gotten it in a different way, but they certainly used that to set up the chess pieces so that you could get the Authority. So
Justin, do you have any other thoughts on that book?
Just the fact that it's like a $20-$30 book now, like I'm just like, wow. Like I don't know, sometimes I look at prices on the aftermarket and some stuff I'm like, I didn't think this would be like a wall book or a $30 book when it was originally like $4 back in the day, but I'm like, oh, this is like a $20 to $40 book now. Wow. I mean, I get it, I understand why, but I'm just like, I don't know, it's just one of those things. It's like, who would have thought? And then kind of like Derek's saying, it's like, oh, they stealthily killed them off, and like you would think that would be advertised all over the cover, like this issue, StormWatch dies, but you're like, no, it just kind of like comes organically in the story and they're all dead, and you're like, whoa, okay, wow. Like, I guess we're doing this.
It's so cool when you don't have to deal with a corporation that's going to try to maximize their profits. So you can actually have creator owners say, let's do the cool version of this. Let's be stealth about it. Let's be sneaky about it. And also, again, it's aliens. Like, you always want to have a consequential crossover. You don't want it to just be like, well, here's an alien and here's Wolverine fighting an alien and whoop-de-doo. You always want it to matter, and it never does. And this is the one time it fucking mattered. You're like, yes! I bought this for a reason. This is the reason I bought this shit. You gave it to me. It's just so nice because we're so often getting greeted with these lackluster attempts at things like that. And to see somebody fully paid off in that way is just awesome. And of course, you got all these rights issues now where Marvel owns the Aliens property and it's a DC owns Wildstorm. So getting that book back into print would be a real bitch. So it's probably not going to happen anytime soon, if ever, especially because you've got so many different associated rights holders, not just Marvel and DC, it's all the people associated with those properties. So there is a value to having the actual book because probably you're never going to be able to get that again. Although, I've thought the same about ROM and Micronauts, so who the hell knows?
No, but you bring up a good point that explains why the book is valued presently, right? Because in present day, it seems highly unlikely that would get reprinted anywhere, right? So that makes sense.
And the fact that this is hard in continuity at this point, it's been retconned since then, just like all things Wildstorm has been retconned since then. This universe no longer exists in any continuing continuity. But at the time this takes place, yeah. And in fact, they specifically, I mean, these characters are alive again too. All the characters that were killed off here, they've been since resurrected. And it's not even like that it's a different continuity, so we're just bringing them back again. My understanding is they explicitly brought them back even before then, whereas like mulliganed before they even ended the first Wildstorm universe. But in the time period, for probably a decade or so after this was hard continuity. And again, they're superhuman beings, but they've not had to deal with anything quite like the xenomorph. And I've read all that StormWatch material that you skipped over, and so I know that the Daemonites are introduced into StormWatch with the team not knowing who they are, and there's a substantial portion of the first 2 years devoted to them slowly recognizing the threat of the Daemonites and confronting them as people who possess other people and shapeshift and do all this kind of other stuff. And they address in the story where the Wildcats think the Daemonites may be involved in that, and they're of course much more familiar with that alien threat. They even physically resemble one another to some degree, and they're going to the station not only as a humanitarian mission, but specifically they're luring members of the team that would not necessarily be as altruistic to go to the base, specifically because of the threat of it being Daemonites, and it ain't. And as a result of that, they end up disparaging the Daemonites because the xenomorphs are so much more deadly, so much more effective, and the fact that they take advantage of like the action figure lore or the Space Marines comics where the aliens impregnate superhumans and then they're breathing fire at you. And under normal circumstances, that could be a problem. For instance, Batman aliens with the dumb hybrid commando, Batman's Rogue Gallery aliens, but here's those aliens xenomorph, but it happens to breathe fire. Fuck you, superheroes. And that's really almost all they do with it. You got to figure some of them are probably superhumanly strong, so they're going to have more, they're able to tear, say, Spartan apart, for instance. Though, let's be honest, that's not that much of an accomplishment. The one that's actually able to...
That's what he's there for, isn't it?
Right, exactly. The one that manages to jackhammer jaw Void in the belly, that one's probably a superhuman alien. I'm going to give him the no prize on that one, because I don't think that would happen under normal circumstances, given how powerful that entity is supposed to be. But again, it's great because, we've got a person who can just teleport us out as any problem. No, we don't. And eventually she gets it back together again and does. But for a time period, these heroes are clearly under threat. And what's nice too is by taking out Maul specifically, most of the people who are left are like Grifter, Zealot, marginally to non-powered people. I'm not quite sure why Warblade gets a pass on his claws not being burned by the xenomorph blood, especially since it's the natural part of his body. But you do feel that they're imperiled, and of course all the StormWatch members that are killed by the aliens and almost toyed with by the aliens too, like the shot where Fahrenheit's being dangled off of the tail of the alien and her guts are falling out. That's almost a Romero moment, right? But being able to affect horror in this superhero story, it's a real credit to Ellis for creating the mood. It's a credit to Chris Sprouse being able to sort of do like he's so good at doing those like bright and shiny Legion type characters that he got his teeth on, and then to employ that Walt Disneyification of heroes into something that's morbid and twisted like this, the way he treats these characters. And of course you've got Kevin Nowlan to put his little sheen on it, but he's actually has a great fidelity to Sprouse's line. He's not assimilating Sprouse at all. There's only a few pages, mostly involving the xenomorphs, where it's not clearly Chris Sprouse drawing it with a little embellishment. I wouldn't have known that Sprouse had this in him until he did it.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's a very versatile guy, and I think he gets a lot depending on his inker. So I think, for example, the Tom Strong inks by Al Gordon and the Legion ink by Al Gordon is fine, but it's a kind of a Terry Austin deadline versus when Carl Story inks him. I think this stuff makes him interesting, and it's just about when computer coloring is actually making sense. So like I'm refreshing by looking at it online and looking at kind of thumbnails, and the colors look pretty awful with like a helicopter view, but page to page actually it's a decent job. And he's an amazing storyteller, so there's a reason he ended up working with Alan Moore, and I think perhaps some of that comes from working with Keith Giffen on Legion or whatever, but the pacing of everything is super solid.
I remember when he was doing the Legion stuff, it was a little too bright, happy, shiny people for me, so I wasn't sure if I was going to be a Sprouse fan. But by the time he got to the end of the decade, especially when he was working with Alan Moore, it's funny too because you're talking about how the books that brought you back to Image were StormWatch and Supreme, and here's Chris Sprouse on WildCA.T.s Aliens to bridge that gap. His take on Supreme was so special because it suited so well what Alan Moore was doing. It evoked Superman without being a knockoff, definitely served his this notion of doing a modern version of specifically the Silver Age Superman stories and almost playing it like Superman is aged to the point where he would look like Supreme did. It's really great looking stuff, and I really enjoyed Sprouse in this time period and going forward.
Yeah, if I won a lottery, I think one of the things I would do would be to pay him to redraw the lot of it. Not necessarily all
the Rick
all of
Veitch stuff, you
Supreme,
mean?
but no, I think I'd leave the Rick Veitch but just get rid of all of those extreme artists. I mean, what an absolute shit show. And Joe Bennett. I think Joe Bennett was quite a part of it, wasn't he?
I know he was,
as you mentioned
there,
it earlier.
Before Moore. I've not ever read Moore's full run. I've read bits and pieces of it, but I've not yet read the whole thing. Like I remember flipping through the issues that Sprouse drew and being very impressed with. His take was so much more fresh, and it felt like this was the character was coming into his own the way that he was being drawn in those issues as a part to some of the earlier material. But I've missed a lot of that stuff, so I'm not the guy to ask, to be honest with you.
Fair enough. You might want to wait until you got like glaucoma or something, and then have your other half read it to you in a hospital bed, and you'd really enjoy it that way. But if you're looking at the art until about 12 issues in, it's extremely painful. Liefeld bangs on about how much he spent on Alan Moore for that, but he could have stumped up another 20 quid or something to get an artist because it's rough looking work. But back to this, I mean, StormWatch WildC.A.T.s was, I think it was a game changer in terms of what you might actually expect from a crossover, and even just the general acceptance with a crossover is that it leaves both of the primary characters untouched, which is true in this case. But there was a third character, which was StormWatch, who were left absolutely mangled by the whole experience. So it's quite funny. Are aliens coming out clean? Yes. They're coming out as a winner? More or less. WildC.A.T.s? Same. StormWatch? Oh yeah, they're fucked. So it's quite an interesting approach to a crossover.
Usually I find that the term aliens is detrimental because it's such a generic term that if I'm trying to search for things related to aliens and specific artists working on these specific aliens, it can be a real hassle. But in this instance, it actually is very helpful because throughout the years they refer to StormWatch being wiped out by aliens, and you can't trademark it, you can't copyright it, so we know which aliens specifically they're talking about, and there's no, like, they don't have to come up with some bullshit fake term for them or anything. It's just like, no, they were killed by the aliens. Oh, which ones? 20th Century Fox's major, horror sci-fi franchise. That's who. So yeah, and then like you've got a character like Flint who was scarred by the alien blood, and that was maintained going forward, as I recall.
Yes, that went through to the later stuff. I'm just thinking how much the aliens were. So yeah, the Brood in X-Men. I mean, they weren't exactly left alone. The aliens, big long-headed aliens, pretty ubiquitous in comics once they came out.
And I realized this was a time period when the members of the original WildC.A.T.s weren't really tight with each other, and they definitely play that up in the story, especially the contention between Grifter and Zealot. And it's funny, like, it's a little bit annoying because they play that a lot throughout the story, but I like that Ellis could have easily just taken the piss with this, and instead it's like, no, the characterization is sound. He was already working on StormWatch, so all those characters, their voices are correct. There's so few comic books like this where they take the two properties, they serve them well, they give you something that has artistic merit, that has canonical value. There are stakes here, and there's a horror franchise, and there are moments of true horror here. It's an extremely impressive book. It looks great, it reads great, it's held up over time. This is one of those deals where like Marvel and DC are reprinting their crossovers again, which I never thought was going to happen, especially once Disney owned one and Warner Brothers on the other. It's almost like, man, Warner Brothers must be in really bad shape if they're going back into Disney to let them reprint this amalgam crap. But it's like, they own the aliens too. Maybe we could get this back into print as well, and I'd be much more enthused about buying this book again in a higher quality format than I would be the stinking amalgam books.
Yeah, I mean, the amalgam is the amalgam stuff is something else. The Marvel DC crossovers otherwise could be okay. I remember I think there was like 4 trade paperbacks originally of the different crossovers, and they were definitely diminishing returns. By the time you get to Mark Bagley and Scott McDaniel doing the crossovers, it's hardly Walt Simonson and John Buscema, is it?
Yeah, and that's the problem that I'm having too, is I'm looking at these high-priced trades, and it's like, well, I know know that it's there's that FOMO where it's like, this may never happen again. You don't want to buy it now in the superior format. But then I remember those books were coming out when I had my shop. There was no reason why I couldn't pull those books aside and kept them for myself. I didn't want them. I didn't want them when they were new. I didn't want them when I knew what the continuity was with the characters, so I'd catch the little Easter eggs and stuff. Why would I want them now?
Yeah, no, totally. And the amalgam thing made me laugh when I heard about it, the amalgam omnibus. And then once you pointed out it was going to be missing bits for obvious reasons, it just makes it even more ridiculous that they would even bother, you know?
Yeah. Well, especially when it's like $150 tome. When it's just gigantic, unwieldy book where the only reason you would buy it is for it to be comprehensive, and they're specifically telling you it will not be comprehensive. No. I keep my money then. Like you said, I love how you put it. Why would you want to spend $150 on a bunch of 50-cent comics? Point to you. And those are even printed on like glossy stock and stuff. They're not like square bound or anything, but those pages have held the test of time. They still look good. You can just go buy those books. You don't need a special, comprehensive, non-comprehensive edition.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure. Let me just check my CLZ. But I think if I look on my database, I have like 7 out of 24 or something, and that's all I need. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, I've got maybe more. I've got maybe 10 out of 24.
Do you have the one where Jose Luis Garcia Lopez is inked by Kevin Nowlan? Okay, you're set, right? No. You don't need Lobo the Duck.
Exactly. No, I definitely don't need Lobo the Duck. 2 Dave Gibbons, Rodolfo DiMaggio inked by Sienkiewicz, the Garcia Lopez inked by Nolan, and then like Carrie Nord, Bruce Wayne, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. That's all right as well.
Gary Franklin, Bullets and Bracelets, I like.
Bullets and Bracelets, that's 6. But yeah, there are plenty of like surprisingly good. Oh, Tom Grummett.
Oh, he did. What you have?
Challenges the Fantastic.
Yeah, you got Wieringo on Spider-Boy too.
Oh, and then Ladron on Spider-Boy and the Legion.
Oh, that was so great. I love that one.
So yeah, there's definitely value in it, but whatever Ghost Rider was called, Speed Rider.
Salaroka, I think, did that one, right?
Yeah, fucking awful.
Yeah. And see, I bought that for the Demon side. I was not well served.
yeah, it was a Ghost Rider comic in all but any other. And then the Jim Balin Batclaw, Dark Claw, whatever.
Was that
rubbish.
Balin who did that one? Okay.
Yeah, it was Balin who did the first one, and then Ty Templeton and Rick Burchett who did the second one. Right,
the animated version, yeah.
Which was great. I bought recently the Adam Polina Riders of the Hex Riders.
Okay, yeah, I forgot about that one.
So it was like Peter Milligan and Adam Polina. So I thought that would be good, but it wasn't.
Polina for me is hit and miss. Sometimes I really like his stuff, and other times not so much. There's a reason why I forgot that one.
Yeah, those early X-Force issues were extremely striking in their day.
I actually picked up his early Triumphant work. I don't remember what the title of the book was. Maybe the Chromium Man or something. But I was there from early on, and so it's one of those deals where I got to like stand back and watch him as he graduated and got into the professionals and stuff like that. But I can't say that I supported a lot of that work, but I was happy to see him get it.
Yeah, no, he did all right, and then went off to Hollywood, and then came back and did some comics again, but not in the same way as Steve Scrooge did. Yeah. Have you read Steve Scrooge's latest comics?
I haven't read his stuff, but I really enjoyed his artwork from that time period, from around the time he was working on the Matrix stuff. He had a really great style, and I think he lost a little bit of his edge when he came back for stuff like We Stand on Guard. But it's stuff where I didn't get all the issues, so I have like 3 of the 5 or whatever. So I'm not gonna read it till I have them all. And I've got like I think I've got a trade on one of the books that I haven't gotten around to reading. I'm really good at buying stuff. I'm not so good at reading it, especially since I spend so much time reading freaking Alien stuff instead.
Yeah, exactly. I've got to read Alien Stalker with the Lurkers. Is that what they're called? The Creepers, the Lurkers.
Well, it's like I spent a lot of my vacation reading all this image material, so it's like great. I've read 35 issues of StormWatch, and I got to find time to hook up with Fix-It to do a vomit on all the stuff that I just read, and hoping that my aging brain doesn't lose too much of the information along the way. We'll see how that goes. That's I took the hardcover Savage Dragon Archives with me and got that read. I read the run of Freak Force, all this stuff where it's like, well, I meant to get around to that, but I didn't mean it to all happen like a 3-week span.
Yeah, fucking hell. And as far as your brain's running out.
They are. Well, I've lost something. I'm lesser for this.
Well, on the Scrooge front, We Stand on Guard is probably the weakest thing he's done. Doc Frankenstein was brilliant. Maestros was excellent, like really funny, good satire. Pax Americana, I think it was called, Pax something, that another Image series he did was very good. And Clobbering Time that he did for Marvel was really good. Like he's gone from strength to strength.
And I know We Stand on Guard was Vaughn, but is he writing his other stuff?
No, it's all Scrooge writing his other stuff. The We Stand on Guard's okay. Problem is, like art-wise, he's using a lot of modelling stuff. So his figures look really empty and hollow. It's not quite AI, but it's got quite an unpleasant vibe to it. And Matt Hollingsworth's colours don't actually help it. But Maestros he did with Dave Stewart, and that's excellent. It's so funny. I'd recommend it to anyone.
Was that
funny,
Wildstorm
clever,
or Image?
and Image?
Okay, I gotta look. I might have picked up the trade on that, but I don't know for sure. I'd have to go check.
Well, if you have and you got a couple of hours to spare, I recommend it.
That's not a long one anyway, right? That's like 3-4 issues, something like that.
I think it's more like 6.
Oh, is it? Okay.
But you could probably justify it as like a follow-up and an in-depth on like X-Man or something. But no, it's really good stuff.
Mike's Amazing World of Comics reports that WildC.A.T.s Aliens #1 was released on September 2nd, 1998, based on the internet resources Comic List and Usenet. However, previews and Comics Buyer's Guide had it pegged as the previous Wednesday, August the 26th. My memory isn't good enough to quibble over the matter. By 1998, Marvel sales were back at Diamond Comics distribution, so there's no glaring asterisks on Comicron's reporting that WildC.A.T.s Aliens ranked 74th in sales, with 32,023 ordered at $4.95 each. Image Comics was stated as the official packager, and it was their logo alongside Dark Horse's. While Wildstorm was sold to DC that year, DC didn't start publishing the line officially until January of 1999. Speaking of Dark Horse, they outranked WildC.A.T.s Aliens with a single title, Frank Miller's 300, at 53rd with 43,647 copies sold, bettering it by more than 11,000. But also it cost $2 less, so WildC.A.T.s Aliens probably made more money. Whether the one-shot came out in August or September, it would have competed against an issue of Aliens vs. Predator Eternal and Dark Horse's Terminator relaunch, and it would have beaten both. The story was reprinted first in the collection StormWatch Final Orbit, which Mike's asserts was released on August 29th, 2001. That's nearly 3 years to the day of the original release, depending on your source. In this instance, Mike's sources were unanimous between Previews Catalog, Comic List, and the Diamond Shipping List, the latter of which I'd consider empirical. Comicron lists the trade among the August 2001 graphic novel pre-order sales to North American comic shops as derived from Diamond Comic distributors. It took 6th place in units with 7,793 initially sold, but came in 12th for dollar share at just $9.95. The edition featured a new Brian Hitch cover that incorporated a xenomorph drone head amidst all the Wildstorm characters. Ranked above it were the $6.95 square-bound Captain America Nick Fury, The Otherworld War by Peter Hogan and Leonardo Manco. I bought it, I read it, I remember nothing of it. Next was Image's Blunt Man and Chronic trade, Dark Horse's Lone Wolf and Cub, Volume 13, and their recollection of Akira Book 4, then Top Cow's Rising Stars Volume 2. The StormWatch trade managed to beat the first collection of Wizard's Twisted Toy Fair Theater and the second volume of Little Annie Fanny, the Playboy comic strip being collected by Dark Horse, as well as DC's editions of Batman Officer Down and Swamp Thing Volume 4, A Murder of Crows. Since we talked a lot about Chris Sprouse this issue, Tom Strong Book 1 was ranked 14th in units. Speaking of artists, the original plan was for Gil Kane to pencil the book rather than just a variant cover, but he bowed out due to health issues. He passed away a couple of years after its release. Someone at DC had decided that this book had potential and sprang for a costly ad in Wizard magazine. The catch was that it was on a tight deadline, something like a week or less. Editor Scott Dunbier sent Kane reference for Zealot and art directed the image, but was told by Kane that he didn't need reference for the alien. Kane had finished the pencils overnight, then shipped the page FedEx to inker Kevin Nowlan, who swiftly called Dunbier to fax him a copy. The editor had failed to specify to Gil Kane that he wanted an H.R. Giger xenomorph and not just a random alien creature from Kane's imagination, and got the latter. Dunbier explained to Nowlan that they were in deep trouble, and Nowlan referenced an old Mad Magazine Lone Ranger parody, stating, "What do you mean we, white man?" in his best Tonto voice. Eventually, Dunbier offered double rate to get Nowlan to redraw the alien, and suddenly there was no problem with getting the finished piece to Wizard on time. By the way, when Warren Ellis was offered the project, he thought he was bloody stupid, but then he was told he could kill any character he wanted to, and that's what got him on board. The story was collected again in 2016's DC Comics, Dark Horse Comics, Aliens. This $24.99 collection ranked 40th in units and 31st in dollars with 2,128 copies shipped.
Speaking of choice art, what's your page in this project?
Yeah, so the WildC.A.T.s aliens would have to be the like, sort of half splash with the aliens coming out the smoke.
Ah, that was nice.
And it's sort of a kind of very green page.
That was almost like juxtaposing a Kevin Nowlan image against Sprouse image.
Chris Sprouse, yeah.
Because that's one of the rare instances where you can see Nolan going to town, just like that one face hugger we see in the video. It's like, wow, the Sprouse got obliterated on that one. That's clearly a Kevin Nowlan face hugger we're looking at here.
Yeah, Sprouse's take on Zella and her body armor and stuff is pretty unattractive. It's all a bit like Xena Warrior Princess in like football gear. So yeah, that half splash is my takeaway. It's great.
Yeah, and for me, I'm going to go a little later in the book. See, I'm looking at the pages, and I like the pages. I like the WildC.A.T.s well enough, but the pages are kind of the same to some degree. And when I'm trying to pick a page, like one specific page as a spotlight, I want something that's going to be standing apart from everything else that's done. And so looking at the book, the one that really grabbed me, the page really grabbed me, is half the book is the WildC.A.T.s having run within like air ducts or something, and they're smashing their way free and going back down into a hallway. And the other half of the page is them discovering the StormWatch red shirts, the normal humans that have been captured and entombed by the aliens. It's another one of these, like what you said, where you've got a page where one part of it is clearly very, very Kevin Nowlan, and the other part of it is very clearly Sprouse. And this is a page where all the alien stuff, all of the cocooning is very, very clearly Kevin Nowlan, unmistakably so. And some of the faces on some of the humans similarly, but there are other faces that are very unmistakably Sprouse. And so the integration of the Sprouse elements into the Nowlan elements I find really striking on that page, but also because there are members of this crew that their faces are half ripped off and basically hanging off. Sort of looks like something you might do with one of the T-800 Terminators, but because these are actual humans, you've got that surreal quality. It's maybe more like when the girl's face is half off in Cabin Fever, where it's like there's just a sense of the wrongness of someone who draws like Kevin Sprouse, who has these pretty clean cut middle American type people, and then you've got half their faces exposed and they're enshrouded in all this alien stuff. It's just a lot of stuff happening on that page that provokes a visceral response in me. I just really dig all those contrasts, so that'd be the page I would want.
Yeah, out of just skimming through, out of like 48-page comic, I'd say there's a few real bangers, and the rest are just very good at doing their job. Yeah. And the page you picked is very good as well, but there's a lot otherwise, which is like just in service to the story, which is as it should be. But I guess you're just sort of picking your moments in a story like this, the things that are really speaking to you. I like there's the page with the guy lying on the floor with his head half torn off, and then a boot. Yeah. Exactly, the boot kind of obscures that face. Like it's a very nice little sequence. There's also a friend of mine who chooses his art based on whether or not he'd actually be able to hang it on the wall. So taken in that context, you wouldn't be hanging that picture on your wall.
Yeah, you've also got a really nice combination of styles on the Alien Queen splash page. That's one that would probably look good on a wall. And I really like the splash where they open the door to find the surviving StormWatch members. I'm a fan of Avery Brooks, especially as Benjamin Sisko. So seeing his analog here, I like the way Sprouse draws them. And so pretty much any page that's got King on it, I'd be happy to have. I really like that bizarre Illuminati StormWatch logo that I know got some play during the rainy period, but not enough because it's really cool. And I don't remember seeing it that often. And it's all over these pages, and I dig seeing it.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. All good. All right, it's 2:30 at my end, so I'm going to wrap.
I made sure to give you plenty of opportunities to exit. The ramp was there.
No, I'm good.
But you had fun?
It's Saturday night.
I think I'm out.
Okay, no worries. Well, like I said, I know you got to work, so I'm not going to keep you too long, but it's always a pleasure talking with you, and if you think of anything else you want to record on, give me a shout.
Yeah, thanks, mate. Yeah, well, let's say hi to Picquita for me.
I will. I'll let her, like I said, I made sure to tell him. I'll tell him you said hi. I'll make sure. No worries. All right, man. I'll talk with you later.
Okay, I think that might be it then.
Cool. Okay. So, and thanks for indulging me on this little extra bullshit thing that I threw at you guys.
No problem.
Yeah, I'll snip it out and then send it to you or whatever. So.
Okay, cool. Sounds good.
Got some stuff. Cool. All right, then I guess we're good then. And again, thanks for doing this, man.
No, hey, I'm glad. You know, I'm happy. You've bailed me out plenty of times in the past, so I'm perfectly happy to help. Holler if you ever need anything.
Thanks, man.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Good night.
Hey, Frank.
20th Century Fox 2010, Andy Rosick, Azor 00500, Between the Pages blog, Captain Entropy, Chris Dunford, Chris Lyden, Classic Comics, Dash Swell 0U812, Dave's Comic Heroes blog, Del Dracula, who added, maybe you're sick of me talking with Frank about aliens, but maybe you're not. I included a drawing of a drone saying, God sent me to spank you. Derek WC, Edmore Teal Productions, Go Modern Art, Great Rebel Dragon, The Guy Who Likes Lemons, Hello at Illistep, Into the Weird, who added, great episode, always loved the Schultz aliens, even more than his dinosaurs. The Irredeemable Shag, Jared Keene, Keith G. Baker, King Dinosaur, Queenie Todd, Kiskavi, KXSSKVY, it's a Tumblr thing, I don't know if it's an abbreviation or what, Leo C. World, Marcelo S. Nicola, Maxo, Michael, who added, interesting discussion, enjoying these episodes, a good presentation of the issues, stories, and theories. I've never read any of the issues, but do not feel lost. We didn't have a proper plot this episode, so maybe this time. Mijadani, Mike is almost sure he exists, Ocular Skewer, Hello Blanco Photo, Professor Broomer, Relatively Geeky Podcast Network, Rogue Gun Works, SAFS Prototype Jer, SPT 8000, The Telltale Mind, and Tunaz. Finally, we received anonymous messages on a couple of episodes from the Aliens Predator Versus WordPress post about the world of Magnus, who his lady friend is, the politics of Northam, and included interesting, compelling details without over-explaining the exo helmet. The Predator was a little more verbally coherent than I'd expect, but the character and storytelling are much more accessible for it. Reading it now in 2025 unlocks some forgotten disdain I once had for Lee Week's art. I must have seen a preview of this book in 1992 because I still had most of the Mignola swipes mentally cataloged. Knowing Lee Weeks quickly moved past that and is now a gigantic talent resolved by 33-year-old grievances. Continuing on to the Apocalypse Destroying Angels episode, bar none one of my all-time favorite podcast series, most educational. You've expanded my appreciation of the Dark Horse Aliens minis. I followed them for a while, but after Labyrinth I bailed. I felt like it was never going to get any better, so I couldn't come back for a bunch of AVP crap. The market for my favorite flicks seemed geared towards cinematic universe ends, and I didn't want that, even in my comics. Consequently, I kind of forgot Dark Horse was grinding out one miniseries or one shot after another for the Aliens machine, so I've been using this pod to pick series for my shopping cart. Anyway, no matter how hard this pod project hangs heavy as a grindstone around your neck, some of us get good from it, Hart. And yeah, it's been really hard to continue podcasting in recent months and I guess years. It's really tough to just bear down and do editing and things like that anymore. Yeah, there doesn't seem to be as much of an audience as there used to be, so it's hard to get motivated, so stuff like this does help.
This has been the Rolled Spine Podcast. All audio samples are believed covered under fair use laws. No copyright infringement is intended.
Coming in September, Dark Horse presents Predator Omnibus 3.